Thank you. So just welcome all to UX Over Lunch. Here's just a little bit about UX Over Lunch. The founders you've heard from, Matt, Dean, and also Brittany are all on the call. So we give a huge thank you to them. This is this group originated in Denver, but there's a lot of people on this call who I imagine are from Denver, maybe not from Denver. So if you haven't already, make sure you drop in the chat where you're from. Also feel free to share where you are at in your UX journey. It's always great to, see who's a veteran, who's new. So please use that chat. A little bit about myself. My name's Jackie Smith. I'm here in Denver, Colorado, and I am your moderator for today. I've recently gone through the whole process of joining a new company. So a lot of questions that, people have as they're, job hunting, trying to find, new teams to work with and just like where they fit in the space. I just went through a lot of that. I'm a manager for a very small UX team at Electric based out of New York City. I work remotely. And I've been in the UX space since around like 2010, so a number of years. Before we introduce all of our panelists, just some, ground rules. We have, great topics today. But as far as ground rules, we ask that any of the attendees that you please remain on mute during this. You're more than welcome to turn on your cameras. At the end, we'll have time for, some questions. But as the presenters are, as the panelists are talking, feel free to have a conversation there, throw some questions. Brittany's going to be, monitoring that, seeing if there's any questions that we want to, bring to everyone's attention and discuss more. And then we ask all the panelists, just a reminder to, try to stay within like 2 minutes just so we can have a good conversation and get to a number of questions. And then at the end, we have reserved time for audience questions. And we can either, again, you can drop in the chat, you can come off mute at that point and, ask questions, whatever you feel comfortable with. So I'm now going to let each of the panelists introduce yourself. So starting with Melody.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Melody Ethley. My background is in computer information systems, and I started my journey in design as a UX researcher, kind of turned content strategist in some ways at the Library of Congress, and most recently have been at University of Texas at the libraries as a UX designer, kind of doing all things strategy, research, and design. But most recently now I'm a product manager. So kind of similar to Jackie, I'm entering a new space and figuring out all the things. So I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to have a great conversation with y'all.
Thank you, Melody. And I think it's great we'll all get to see kind of how that transition and if it's changed. It's great to have someone who has a design background and now a product manager. Bryce.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Bryce. I just got married. So last name is now Schaefer, but Bryce Seifert was my previous name. I am a UX strategy professional. I have over 6 years, started in about 2017. And I've typically been on the agency side working for clients like Nestle, Starbucks, Neutrogena. I have a little bit of product side, but mostly focusing on e-commerce for my clients. And yeah, I've managed a couple of teams before. Right now, I'm working as a senior strategist for an agency helping with AT&T.
Thank you, Bryce. Julie.
Oh, thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Julie Duffer, and I'm based in Salida in Colorado here. I've been at this a while. It's taken a lot of different turns throughout my career. I started in UX before it was UX, so I've done a lot of different things and worked at a number of different companies, from startups to data-heavy med tech to fintech, where I'm at right now. I've had different roles. I've had, went into leadership about 10 years ago and really love what I'm doing. I love leading teams. I love mentoring people. I taught for about 7 years at Front Range Community College, if you're from the Denver area, and really found my passion for teaching. And so a lot of what I do is, educating and coaching and mentoring. And I really love that part of my job in this field of UX that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you, Julie. And Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura Turner, and I'm currently a senior accessibility designer at Spectrum or Charter Communications, which offers services like television, internet, wireless access, and other kind of telecom services. I'm new to accessible design. I started this role in October 2023, but I've been in UX design since 2017. I did a big career pivot. So I started out as a kindergarten teacher in Denver Public Schools, but then took a General Assembly boot camp. And since then have worked at a variety of startups and enterprise companies, mostly on the product side, with one stint at an ad agency just to kind of switch it up. Thanks. Excited to be here.
Great. And those are our 4 amazing panelists for today. We're gonna get to spend the next, 50 minutes with everyone. So we're gonna start diving into some of the questions. So this first question, I wanted to ask, Julie, I know there's and then, welcome others to follow up, but how do you prioritize self-care and maintain a healthy work-life balance in a demanding field like UX design?
Sure. Yeah, it's not easy, right? We're all balancing so many different things. I schedule it, I work it in. I find that 10 minutes here and there is better than nothing at all. So I try to just kind of flow with the day. Sometimes I have meetings. I work East Coast time, and so I start very early, like 6 a.m., sometimes 5:30 a.m. Colorado time, but around 10, folks sometimes go to lunch. And so there's a little break. So I might run around the block for, a few minutes or hop on the Peloton, which was a pandemic purchase and I've kept with. I might do a little yoga before I start work, but try to move in, work in some kind of movement or exercise throughout the day. I recently heard about modeling. So like with my team, I have, a lot of people that I feel like I need to model the behavior that I want them to. And when they go on vacation, I'm like, check out, do not forget about us, have fun, disconnect. And so I need to do that too. And it's hard. But I heard recently a term called rest ethic. So we've heard about work ethic and that, but like really taking time to rest and recharge and not showing people that you're working all the time. That's actually not setting a good example for folks, especially in a leadership role or just even as peers. And some companies have unlimited vacation, which has a mixed wrap, and some companies have accrued vacation. But regardless, if you go on vacation, take vacation and everything will be okay. It'll all still be there when you come back. And so balancing that and being able to let go, especially working from home, is hard, right? Close the door and walk away. I think, as far as like healthy eating, I try to do a lot of meal prep on the weekends. I try to eat healthy during the week, certainly like Monday strong, Tuesday pretty good, Wednesday getting there. By Thursday it's all kind of gone up in smoke, but I do my best and regroup. And then lastly, I think the hardest thing about that self-care is really the mental stress, right? There's so much that we're thinking and processing, and a lot of us are creatives, and sometimes we need that like downtime to come up with ideas or that quiet. And sometimes we don't get that until much later in the day or in the middle of the night, which, is not awesome. So the ways that I try to mitigate that, I'll try to download it on paper, like old school, before I go to bed, or reading a novel. I can't read, industry books before bed. I can't look at vacation plans or Pinterest. I get too excited. I need something that is gonna like help me remove and detach and kind of forget so that I can sleep. Getting outside, I think, is the biggest thing for me, is even if it's 10 minutes, like I said, sitting outside or walking around the block, or forest bathing. If you've heard that term, that's, walking around in the woods and hiking, which really is restorative to me. So it's a mix, it's a variety. I try to do something every day. But also like, I think going easy on yourself. You didn't work out, or you had a chimichanga for lunch, and some days are like that, and you did your best, and that's okay. So balancing that.
Mhm. Yeah, I've personally never heard the term, what do you say, rest ethic? So something we're gonna have to do some research on. Bryce, I was wondering if you had, some thoughts on this topic as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, everything that Julie said was exactly, I think, spot on. You can do a lot to prioritize, plan ahead to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. So I think something that's maybe more unique that I'm going to speak on is the importance of having kind of management and a company culture that's really going to work for what you need. So when I think back to times in my life where I've been the least, mentally healthy and not taking care of myself, it really has been because I've had a really demanding work experience. And, I've been so lucky to have some really amazing managers. Dean, one of the hosts, is one of them, but I've had some really amazing managers. I've also had some really poor managers that can really impact your experience with work, and you think about how much time we spend working. So it's really important. And I think, some of my advice, especially to anyone who's potentially looking for a new job, is to really pay attention when you're speaking to the hiring manager. I know so much of interviewing is so stressful and you're trying to get the job, but I also think it's a really good opportunity for you to understand if this person who is going to be a big part of your work life is going to be someone that you align with. So this is kind of the inverse of what Julie was saying in that management position, but finding someone who, understands how you work best and thinking about what you really care about, and then kind of aligning that to who this hiring manager would be is really important. So thinking, do I want someone that's going to trust me? Do I want someone who allows for flexibility in my day, and trying to align those best you can, I think is really impactful, especially in terms of self-care, just because so much of us take on so much of our work.
That was a big decision that I just had to go through with changing companies. And Melody, like, given that you've just changed recent roles, did that play into a factor, what Bryce was just talking about?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Bryce is spot on in what she just said. And like a lot of what Julie was saying too about just managing my cortisol levels through movement has been really helpful for me. So I try to do my best to prioritize some type of movement. I'm a former volleyball player, and so I try to incorporate that into my day to day. But also just walking is really helpful. There's a nice little park near my apartment complex that I sometimes go to. And so I found that using those techniques has been a great way to maintain my work-life balance.
Great. Any other, comments from the panel on this topic? Okay. So Melody, would love to you to answer this question. How did you handle imposter syndrome or self-doubt, especially in high pressure design projects?
Yeah, this question is so timely, especially like navigating from the research space and the PM space. Right now, I'm having this kind of internal conflict of I really want to do research, but I also need to maintain project progress, right? And so I think this kind of builds on the last question. One of the main things that I try to do is just kind of cultivate confidence in myself, because I think that radiates to every other area in my life, if that's personal or professional. And so what that looks like for me is I love journaling. And so I journal like my accomplishments, or I just journal like how my workday felt. I keep a personal one and also a professional one. And that's really been a great kind of reflective practice for me to just go back to and say, oh, actually, I kind of am good at this, or at least in my own humble opinion. The other thing I do is I try to keep like a rolling Google Doc of people who have like given me praise in prior jobs or even in my current job. I think that's so helpful for a number of things, especially when it comes to like annual evals seasons. And then just also kind of handling imposter syndrome whenever it shows up. Because for me, it has showed up when I'm starting a new role, but then also when I'm well into the role and a new topic comes around that I maybe haven't experienced before. One of the hot takes that I've heard recently was that imposter syndrome doesn't exist, like it's not real. And I didn't know how I felt about that when I initially heard it, because I didn't want to negate my own feelings. But at the same time, the thought process or the logic behind it was that if there's something that you don't know and you don't feel comfortable in, we're in an age of information. So we can go Google and research and have all these kind of tools at our fingertips. So recently in my new role, I've kind of subscribed to that understanding and that logic, which has really helped me. And And some of the ways that I do that in my day-to-day is just I set block times on my calendar, and I just call it executive time for me to either use it for planning in the week or even just like research some things I don't know about and I want to make sure I'm keen on before I go into a big meeting or before I have to, make decisions about improvements for our products. So yeah, imposter syndrome is an interesting concept.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all those tips. Did any other panelists, do you have, thoughts to add on your take on this?
Yeah, a lot of Melody, what you said completely resonated. The folder that you have for that positive feedback, I do similar. It's called my nice things folder. And I'll pop it in there if I'm having a bad day or starting a new thing, I'll go back and have that in there. And when I have an anecdote. When I was new to management leadership, like brand new, and it had kind of come up suddenly. I was in a meeting with the executive teams at a startup. It was a smaller group, and they were forecasting budgets and strategies and P&L. And I was asked for my opinion, and I said, I feel like I'm guessing, and I don't really know. And this wise COO, who I respect so deeply, want to be like him as a leader, he looked at me, he's like, Julie, we're all just guessing. And it was like, I kind of took that away, like, really? Wow. And, I think the learning is that we're all here doing our best and no one has all the answers. And yep, we could absolutely Google it. And it's okay to say, like, I don't know, or help me understand what you're getting at. I don't understand. Than being disingenuous and pretending that you know something that you don't. It's okay to not know things. And similarly, like if you mess up or you embarrass yourself, which I did just last week, I was in an executive meeting and they were talking about some pretty serious things, and I was very distracted with some things going on in my life and home, and I wanted to capture, like with Copilot, the transcript, and I turned it on, and the CEO said, whoever just started transcribing, please stop. This is not a meeting to be recorded. And I was mortified. And the advice that I tried to give myself is shake it off. My boss was like, don't sweat it, no big deal. But it was horrifying for me. But it recalled to me a little quote that I used to have posted when I had an in-office office, that sometimes courage is that little voice inside saying, I will try again tomorrow. Shake it off and move on. Like, we're all kind of imposters and we're all not. So, you're not alone if you feel that way.
I just
Yeah,
want to
Julie.
really quick, sorry, Jackie, echo what Julie was saying about the power of saying, I don't know. It took me a while to learn that, but just like she was saying, people can see when you are being disingenuous about things you know and you don't know. So it's better just to say, like, I don't know, and I'll go back and try to find an answer that is sufficient. So I just wanted to +1 to that, Julie. That's really good advice.
And I think it's also just great hearing from, individuals at different levels of their career, that imposter syndrome or just this, I don't know, and we're always learning. Because yeah, as we move, into different roles, different levels of our career, we're always in that new space of learning something. And I think, always we want to look to our leaders and follow them, but like, I think we can also realize that they're all human. So that's a great reminder. So let's see. Bryce, how have you encountered situations where your design ideas or contributions were overlooked or dismissed, and how did you respond?
Yeah, thanks. This is an interesting one. I feel like the nature of agencies is a little bit of push-pull with clients. And so sometimes it feels like this is happening a lot, but it also is probably pretty relevant for anyone who's frequently working with stakeholders. And, two things kind of come to mind for me. The first is whenever I'm presenting any ideas or contributions, I really try to focus on meeting clients or stakeholders where they're at. So something that's really, a great tool to be able to use is speaking to whoever you're presenting to in their language so that they can immediately kind of understand what you're saying and take you a little bit more seriously because you're immediately connecting to them. So whether that's, bringing in data to help support my points or speaking even in terms that that stick with my clients or stakeholders, those little tweaks and adjustments can help you explain where you're coming from, so that you don't avoid being, or so that you avoid being overlooked. That's one main thing that I've really used, and I can certainly give more examples later. But the other thing that I'm kind of coming to mind is considering ways that you are accidentally playing into gender roles in meetings. So what I mean is, if you are hosting a client, a lot of us will typically kind of immediately move into that hosting kind of, how can I get you water? Can I point you here or there? Another thing that I find is a pretty common gender role that I used to fall into a lot, is offering to take notes, which is incredibly important, but it shouldn't always be the youngest female that's the one doing it, because that can really kind of downplay your contribution and immediately put you from a participant perspective to kind of an admin piece in whatever meeting. So that's something that I'm really mindful of, just kind of taking inventory. I'm not saying you shouldn't be hospitable. I'm not saying you shouldn't take notes, but just kind of thinking through, like, hey, do I have an important role to play in this meeting? If so, I probably shouldn't offer to take notes. Those are just two little examples that I've been thinking of, but by taking kind of an active approach to conversing, especially with people who might be overlooking my opinions, that's really helped to kind of nip that issue in the bud.
Bryce, kind of a follow-up question with that. You know, you were saying you're trying not to offer. Have you like in your teams, have you found ways then to ensure that those responsibilities are, you know, shared amongst others? Like, how have you handled that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Anything can be done well if done tactfully. I typically, if I have a more kind of primary role in a meeting, I'll say, hey, I actually need to be doing XYZ, and I'll point to kind of someone who I know is more secondary and ask, do you mind? Or I can say, yeah, I'll certainly try. I might not be able to catch everything. Can someone else tag in to help? That typically shows that you're willing to help without kind of immediately just shoving the work onto someone else. But yeah, that's been pretty effective for me.
Great. Any other follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I could chime in. So I think what Bryce was touching on about making sure that you're speaking at the level of your stakeholders or to whomever you're presenting to. I also think there's a lot to be said about the way in which you present your design work. And so sometimes if it feels like your work is being overlooked, it actually might be the method with which you're presenting that work. So whether it's in Figma or if it's in some kind of presentation deck, I think it's always really important to know your audience and then present your work in a way that will make sense to them. You know, if you're presenting to executives, that might be a different level than if you're presenting to peers for a critique of your work. And so taking into consideration who your audience is, what level of familiarity they have with your project, and if there is a gap, say someone hasn't been fully immersed in the project, making sure to set the tone for the meeting by having sort of an overview or a contextual section before you get into the meat of the designs. And I also do find it helpful to have additional annotations or highlighting certain elements to really help your audience narrow in on the aspects of the design that you're hoping to receive feedback on.
Yeah, that's a great reminder, Laura. I know with my teams, that's something I'm always helping people upskill in, is how do you set the stage? Because not everyone in the audience, you know, that is so immersed in the solutions as you might be. So great reminder. So Laura, another question for you. What advice do you have for women who are considering transitioning into UX design from other fields or disciplines? I know you mentioned you were a school teacher for Denver Public Schools, so, you know, really excited to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah. So I think first of all, I just want to say you can do it if you're considering a pivot. I did start out as a kindergarten teacher in Denver Public Schools. I really had next to no design background or formal training before I pivoted. So if this is a brand new field for you, it's very possible to make this adjustment and this transition. I think what really matters is being eager and curious to learn. The more that you can be proactive about upskilling and learning UX principles, the faster you'll be able to find your new role. I think knowing your own learning style, like for myself, I really did want to have some level of instruction. So I signed up for a General Assembly boot camp. And quick shout out to the wonderful Matt Ricewig, who was my instructor. Some people prefer to learn at their own speed or their own pacing. So kind of evaluate the way in which you best learn new ideas or concepts, and then kind of make a plan of attack for how you can fill in the gaps in your knowledge. Some specific recommendations. I relied heavily on YouTube tutorials. I mean, it is amazing what you can find. There's some really specific videos out there that might have the answer to what you're looking for. So always give that a shot. It can be very instructional when someone's, even just if you're trying to familiarize yourself with the design software like Figma, they might kind of walk you through orienting how you can find the tools that you need. I think people should try out ChatGPT. You might be able to learn some UX principles there. You can always Google search, read up on articles. And then I also think there's a lot to be said about finding design mentors. So as much as possible, having some one-on-one time with someone who is a bit more advanced with their career or more mature can be really instrumental, to rely on someone to also support you as you're learning and changing careers. And then just one thing with that, of course, be cognizant of your mentor's time. So if you are asking to use their time, be ready, be prepared, have questions ready to go, work to share, etc. Don't be afraid of design critiques. Something like what Dean is offering with that webinar is a great way to just practice some practical skills of absorbing feedback and then making design iterations. And yeah, just have a lot of perseverance and resilience. The job search is tough. I think that first UX role is going to be probably the hardest to find. But as soon as you get your foot in the door, it can get a lot easier with your search. Yeah, I'll pause there if anyone else also wants to add some more thoughts.
Such great advice, Laura. So many resources, and the mentorship path, and what you said about critique too. And I think just to add to that, not only receiving critique, but learning how to give critique too in a way that is constructive and productive. And I think that's an important skill to know. And like my advice about women who are considering transition is go for it. There's never just one path. That circuitous route I mentioned in the beginning has taken all kinds of different directions to end up here. And UX has become more sophisticated and specialized. And even within UX, there's all these different paths. So maybe you specialize in accessibility, or you have more, agency background. There's all these different ways in UX. And it's such a broad discipline that so many backgrounds can lead to UX, like psychology, science, art. People have such wide backgrounds, and I love asking people about, oh, what's your background? And because every UX designer will say something different, and it's quite fascinating. So there's no one right way. Long ago, there wasn't degrees in it, so you don't necessarily need a degree. I think boot camps are awesome, all the resources that Laura added, but if you want to change, go for it.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly add on to that too. In thinking about the generalist or the specialist route, I would say don't gloss over if you like research, if you don't like research, if you like the design more, you don't like design, like really kind of try to pinpoint what it is that you like really excites you when you're doing UX work, because then that will kind of help you navigate, especially after that first role. For me, it was a team of one. So I got to do a lot of things. I got to do research and strategy and design. And I was like, oh, I kind of really like the strategy. So that's kind of where I'm focusing my career now. So I'll just say, like, it may not be first of mind when you're trying to transition, but always keep it in the back of your mind too. It's like, okay, in 5 years, do I want to continue the generalist route, or do I want to specialize in something? And that'll help kind of narrow down what your experience is like.
It's great hearing so many different, but also like similar, encouraging and, perspectives on moving into the space. It's a great topic, and I think there's a lot going on in the chat right now. So we'll get back to some of these more specific questions, but a lot of people are sharing, what they're transitioning from, what fields and everything. So it's great to see all this. So what advice do you have for women who are navigating negotiations for promotions or salary increases in design roles? So I know as we just talked about getting into the field. So for those in the field already, and this might even relate to, non-UX roles, but Bryce, would love to hear some of your thoughts on and advice on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start off kind of sharing a little bit of a vulnerable antidote that right now I'm making 4 times the salary that I had initially made when I entered the job field. And I share that also not because I'm making crazy amounts of cash, but because my initial role paid so little. But I share that in to say that like there are ways to continue to grow your career and continue to grow your salary threshold. And honestly, most of my growth there has come from job switching, which I know is a hot topic and is probably not like the best overarching advice, but what I've learned from that can be kind of applied to everyone. So when it really comes down to it, you have to ask for what you want. And I think, no one's going to advocate for you. It's really nice if you happen to land at a company that does really put a importance on career growth and salary increases, but that's just not kind of the reality for most of us. And what I've learned is that you really do need to kind of speak up and ask for what you want. Making your career goals known with you and your manager and HR and kind of anyone who you might report up to is really valuable. And then also understanding your true market value and then asking for it. And what I would say is you can ask for it and then really listen to the response you're getting. Is it, yes, but is it, we're truly limited right now, but in the future you might, really listening to what that response is, and then kind of taking inventory from there of what your next move is going to be. I think it's totally fine to ask for something and put your head down and wait for a year, 2 years if you feel like you're experiencing growth. So I mean, job hopping is one way to do it, but also just really being clear on sharing what you would like. One thing that I do think is really important to know is that you do have to be doing the work. It's not enough to just share, well, the market value for this is, that, and I would like to be at that specific area. Really making sure that you're a valuable contributor to your team, to the company, just helps make your request that much more compelling.
On that topic of market value, Melody, I know like you just switched, roles, could you talk a little bit about, how you had to, assess your market value as you switched roles, and ensured you were compensated fairly?
Yes, absolutely. In terms of assessing my market value, I basically compared a list of what I think my skills are, my strongest skills, and what my job was asking for. And I wrote, okay, yes, I have this. Yes, I have this. Oh, I could be stronger in this, and so on. And I actually used that as a jumping off point when I was doing my negotiation. Always, always, always negotiate. If that's one thing you take from today, always negotiate. It's a scary thing, but it's always worth it. I usually kind of live by the rule of thumb is to ask for 10K more. Maybe other people have different thoughts, but let them bring you down and really focus on communicating what you bring. Like, what are the 3 things they're looking for in the role? And if that aligns with what you bring, then communicate that and say, here's why I deserve X number. I also think there's one helpful resource that I can think of. It's called Ladies Get Paid. I think it's ladiesgetpaid.com, but sometimes they have free webinars where they talk you through tangible steps to increase your negotiation power, give tools for how you can be better at negotiating and kind of have that confidence in your voice to say, hey, this is what I want. And then also be okay with if there's a number you have in mind and they can't reach it, then you have to make the decision if I want to take this role and know that I can't reach my number, or that I don't take this role, and be okay with whatever decision you decide.
Julie, I was wondering if you would maybe have like just anything else to share from, you lead a team of 50 designers, and I'm curious, just what your perspective is with negotiating and promotions and everything, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, no, of course. And want to add an exclamation point to Melody's comment and what Bryce was saying too. Always negotiate, always. And all the worst that's going to happen is they say no, right? But you learn a lot about how they're answering it. You learn a lot about finding your voice and knowing what you're worth. Talent knows what talent is worth, and be confident in that. As a hiring manager, I expect people to negotiate, and the recruiting process is a little different now, where in Colorado they have to post the salary range in the job recs. So you've probably seen that, and the range can be like wildly different, like job range 75,000 to 120, or 150,000 or something, in a wide range in there. And so it doesn't always indicate where it's at, but do your research and know what you're worth. When people are, if we're recruiting somebody and we have a strong candidate, I expect them to negotiate. We even have, this is a secret, but we even have like a little cushion in there so that people can negotiate, right? Like, it's expected, so don't be afraid of it. Early in my career, I did not negotiate. And later, my boss, who was a friend, she's like, why didn't you negotiate? You didn't negotiate. I'm like, well, I did a little. And she's like, no, you didn't. So be confident, do it. We expect it.
Yeah. No, I know this is sometimes a difficult topic, but I love that, now you mentioned Colorado, like there's a lot of states where it has to be transparent. I think it just helps us, discuss it more openly. So it's great
Sure.
to see it like, in policies as well.
And I have one more quick thing,
Oh, yeah.
sorry, to add about kind of promotions too. I really think that it's beneficial to be really clear on where you want your career to go and share that widely with whoever's managing you, because no one can help facilitate growth in a career if we don't know where you want to go. So really getting kind of a good mindset, and it doesn't have to be within the next year, I want to be here. If you don't think that that's achievable, you should still be sharing, hey, in 3 years, I'd like to be here. That's really going to help those who are involved in your career help facilitate your growth.
That's a fantastic reminder.
And one more quick thing too, that I think when we think about negotiation, the first thing that we think about is salary. But I do also want to mention that there are other elements within an overall package or offer that you can include in negotiation. So that could also be more equity or stock options in the company. It could even be negotiating your paid time off. So there are also some other areas or levers that you can try if for whatever reason you're not making as much traction with the salary like number.
A lot of practical tips here. I keep seeing the chat going as well, so this is great. Let's see. So, what are some common challenges women face when advancing in their design careers, and how can they be addressed? So, we just talked about promotions, taking it one step further into some of the specific challenges. Melody, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most obvious one, as we were just talking about promotions, is the gender wage gap. And so I already shared what one of my tools was to kind of combat my learning experience in negotiating. But the other thing I think about too is like the isms, right? And all of the isms that you can think of. One of my experiences that I had, I was on an email thread with, it was a large one, like 10 people. And I was the only UX person on there. So they were asking me about whether or not to make the decision to implement a new feature. And coming from a research background, I was like, well, you are not your user, right? I don't necessarily know. This is just my educated guess. And I started to give some questions as to why, ask some clarifying questions about why we wanted to implement this feature. Anyways, long story short, but the person who was requesting this feature was like, well, these are all the links as to why this is important for us to implement on this new product. And I kind of felt a little jaded after I received that response. And I think there were some isms involved in that response. And so I just say, call it out. Anytime it happens to you, call it out. And sometimes that looks like you saying it verbally, but for me in that experience, I just remained silent. I remained silent for like a day, 2 days, and someone on my behalf came in and said, "Hey, actually, I think these questions that Melody was proposing was, they were thoughtful, and I think we should consider them a little further." But silence can be really loud. So that's my main, I think, point of action or recommendation is to call it out whenever you are experiencing those isms, whether it's ageism. For me, I was in a organization that people had been there for 30 plus years. And so being the youngest person on a lot of the calls or emails, I would say I probably experienced that more times than not. And so just being, confident to speak up for yourself is one of my thoughts there.
Any other follow-ups?
Yeah, I love what you said, Melody, just about calling it out. That's such a big part of it. And I think there's other challenges that I think of too. Being, not being recognized or heard, like as a softer voice. Like I am not a loud person. I am not like the most talkative person. I play an extrovert at work, but I'm really not. My husband disagrees, but really, like being okay with not having that loudest voice and still being able to be a quiet leader, and that's okay. And if you all have heard of Susan Cain, she writes a book called Quiet, and it was really so eye-opening for me that she's a very soft-spoken woman, and writes an excellent book about how business culture has kind of started like Harvard Business School, where the ethos there was that you had to be the loudest and assertive, and advice in my career has been you got to elbow yourself into that conversation, and you need to like talk over people, and I don't like that. It didn't sit well with me. And then when I read her book, I was like, oh, okay, so there is space in this world for introverted or more quiet leaders, and that I think that there is this expectation that we need to be loud or outspoken or extroverted, and you don't need to be. You just need to be yourself.
Great reminders. I'm still seeing all the questions come through as well. Yeah, I think, I always say, don't always also help, speak out for other people, like, speak out for yourself, but help speak out when you see it.
The other thing I might add
Yeah.
to that too, because before we move to the next question,
That's
the other
good.
thing I might add to that too is a common challenge I've seen is representation. And we might have touched on this in other questions, but sometimes seeing yourself in leadership is really important. In past roles, I have not. And so I've used like networking tools to my advantage, like going to conversations like this, using LinkedIn when I meet people in these rooms, and like looking at their background and trying to make a connection, a genuine connection. I'll add that too, because often we receive messages on LinkedIn and it feels sometimes not intentional as we would like. So I would just say, like, in considering representation, try to create the space for yourself too. I know sometimes that can be hard, but it makes all the difference in terms of career growth and then bringing up people from different stages in their career too, I think is important. Women Talk Design is a great resource that is a public speaking program for women in design, and another opportunity to just meet other like-minded individuals, especially those of us in the design space.
Great things to add about that as well, Melanie. Thank you. So Julie, how do you approach advocating for inclusive design practices and ensuring that products are accessible to users of all backgrounds and abilities? So I know we just talked about advocating for, ourselves, other designers, but like, really like within design, would love to hear some thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, this is such a timely topic at FactSet right now, because one of the things we're doing is up-leveling our accessibility. And like with a lot of things, it starts with awareness and education. So this year we required the whole UX team to do like a base level of accessibility training so that they have they can be advocates and allies and start to kind of cascade it outward. One of our core values as a team, and within any UX, I think any UX field, we're empathetic, right? And that means we define this together, that we're understanding and inclusive for colleagues and for our users. And you really can't be in this field without being empathetic. And inclusive design is really understanding that, somebody may have a permanent, a temporary, a situational disability, and that all of these things that we're creating should be available to anyone regardless of where they are. They may be distracted on a soccer field. They may be like had a broken arm from snowboarding or, whatnot. There's a curve of things. It could be like an older audience, aging where they need to Zoom. It's very, it's a much broader definition now than it used to be. Going from accessibility to inclusion. And Laura, I'm sure you could speak about this all day, but what we are working on next is kind of focus on a concentric circle of, okay, let's start with the UX team. They need to be the experts in this, maybe not the one expert. We do have, we hired a specialist position for an accessibility design lead, and he is doing amazing things, and he's really leading this charge and helping us all to kind of get up to speed on what that is. Then from there, the next concentric circle is product and engineering. And really within that, like the executive team, why is this important? Well, the laws are changing in Europe in June of 2025. And are we going to be able to, our products, will they pass the test then? No, they won't. And so that executive ring wants to know, well, what's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Why is it important? What do you mean by inclusivity? So really starting with definitions and education. And then with product and engineering, same thing. Well, we don't have time to retrofit. We have roadmaps, we have deadlines, we need to get things out there. And so helping them understand that we're partners for you with this and that we can help you get there. But it is more important, and it's more important to do it now than retrofitting later. Things like accessibility annotations in our Figma files. So we're training the design team to annotate everything so that handoff from design to engineering is super clear. Our design system has accessibility baked in. We need to, what the business listens to is we have RFPs coming from government, from education. We need to make sure that we have at least some level of standard of accessibility there. And so with inclusive design, I think where we are personally at right now at FactSet is we have buy-in that it's super important. We need to focus on it. And now it's how are we going to get there? Is it an initiative next year? Are we requiring certain levels of accessibility, like how we get there? But leadership is, completely on board with it. So again, like we've talked about education, a lot of us have that, that background or that value. And that's where I start is we need to first get people aware, educate them, and then work together on up-leveling across the whole organization.
Great. So much in there, Julie, that's like so important and to suss out. I also know, Laura, you're specializing in accessibility right now. So, could you, add anything or have some other things to contribute here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think the field of accessibility, which is kind of like a niche subset of UX, is absolutely growing right now. There are more kind of federal and state mandates that will be coming, but also it's just a great practice to make the web and mobile experiences inclusive for all users. And I think similar to what Julie said about building empathy, I think you can also learn a lot by trying things out. And so if you're a Mac user, I really recommend trying to use VoiceOver, which is a Mac screen reader. That's how folks who are blind or have low vision navigate through different digital experiences. That can build a lot of empathy for yourself to realize how different it might be to interact with different digital experiences using a screen reader. If you have Windows, you can use JAWS or NVDA, and just trying to put yourself into the shoes of users who have different abilities by actually then simulating the way in which they're using tools to navigate, I think can be great. experimenting with like keyboard navigation or tab order, all of that can be a great way to just start to get your familiarity with that space. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that like, yeah, we're seeing a lot more, being discussed in the industry, a lot new jobs being created around accessibility. So, thank you to everyone who's been like sharing, resources as well in the chat. I want to make sure we get to some of the audience questions. So I did. I did put them in my slide deck. We will jump into, am I sharing my screen still? Okay. So any advice on how to advocate for or bring about new UX practices when a company has low UX maturity and you are a junior? So this is one of the questions, we had a similar question in our panel that we didn't get to, but I think, talking about skills, talking about this UX maturity, would love, if anyone on the panel wants to chime in.
I can chime in.
You
Or-
go, Mel. You go, Mel.
Okay, I'll keep it quick, Laura. But when I was at UT Libraries, I was the first UX person on board. There was nobody doing UX. It was kind of like our assessment team was doing some UX methods, but there was no formal kind of process. So the steps that we took were assessing our UX maturity. And we used the Nielsen Norman Group kind of, I forget what it's called, UX maturity scale. They have a quiz on there too. And we had a small kind of web development team do the quiz first, and then we just analyzed our responses. We figured that we were limited, stage 2, and then we shared that broadly with the whole organization. We talked with leadership about it, and we pulled together ways that we could increase to stage 3. And then we also talked about what's the timeline for that. Like, we're not going to meet stage 3 in maybe a year. So what are realistic milestones? So I think anybody at any stage could do this as a junior, mid, and even up, always assessing our UX maturity. And I think it should be something that is done routinely rather than one time and then we're done talking about maturity, because it's going to grow and change all the time. And so just making sure that, the whole organization is knowledgeable about the work that you're doing in your department, and then all have a shared understanding about what UX is and what it is not. That's the quick version. I'll go ahead and kick it to you, Laura, if you have something to add.
Yeah, I think similar to what Melody said, you shouldn't see your label as junior as meaning that's limiting in terms of how you can help to set your company UX vision and strategy. And I just, would chime in as well that the more that you can document different decisions, or like showing where you are now and where you hope to get in a certain amount of time period, similar to what Melody said, that's just going to be really great to have as a reference. Also getting internal stakeholders to have buy-in and become aligned. Sometimes you can run a collaborative design thinking workshop together. That can be a great way to help others feel like their voices are being heard and that they're being involved in the process. So yeah, just wanted to share that as an idea.
Great. Stay. There we go. There's a lot of questions around salary. So this one I grabbed from the chat. Is there any way to ask colleagues or others in the field to share salary with you? I feel like it's such a taboo topic. They want to make sure they're on track.
Yeah, I can speak to this quickly, and then I'm really interested to hear some other perspectives. So I personally wouldn't ask colleagues, just because I feel like it hits a little close to home. That's my perspective, but I am curious to hear others. What I would recommend is going into some of those resources that have been posted and really taking a look. So I know one of the Denver UX meetup runs a salary kind of survey where they take and analyze those results. And that's really, really helpful for you to see what's happening. It is focused on Denver and it's focused on roles, but it's not as close to asking a colleague. When I've heard stories of people I know asking their peers what they make or finding out what they make, it really does become a point of frustration more than I've seen it be resolved. I know that that's not necessarily right, but that's just been my experience. So I would look to other sources, and then I would advocate for yourself. I think, you know, your push for an increase in salary feels a lot more meaningful when it's coming from a place of like, hey, I do this, I feel like I'm deserving of this compensation, rather than the person to my left makes this, I think I'm deserving of that. I just think it kind of sets you up for a better career growth track. But again, I'm really curious to hear some other perspectives.
Yeah, I agree completely, Bryce. I wouldn't ask colleagues either, but what I would do is talk to HR, like what is the range, what are the salary bands within a certain level, and what do I need to do to get there, and what are those sub kind of ranges? Ask your manager, like, you know, I feel like I deserve to be making a little bit more. What do I need to do to get there? You know, open up the conversation. Like I think Melody, you were saying early on, like call it out. You know, we have a right to talk about salaries. I wouldn't ping your colleagues, but there's resources out there. HR should be able to tell you that. It should be transparent and it should be parity. And like if you're interviewing, you're saying like, what do you do to keep salaries parity? You know, those levels are there for a reason, to protect you too, to make sure that your salary is the same that your male counterpart is making or comparable. So those are resources for you to go look and do your research on what you should be earning and what you should be making, what you feel that you deserve.
So I know we're at the top of the hour. Let me know, or should we end it here? Or I know there's a few additional audience questions. How do we?
Yeah, so the way that we handle this, because often our conversations go over time, is just basically want to thank everyone for being here. And if you have to drop, feel free to go, of course. But we are going to hang out and answer a few more of those questions because I know they're really valuable. And panelists, if you have time to stay, that would be great. And if not, we totally understand.
I'm so sorry. I have another meeting I need to jump to, but so nice talking with all of you, the panelists, and hearing your questions and being here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
Thanks for an amazing panel today. This was amazing. Thank all you ladies for being part of this panel. Great discussion and just a great overall panel. Thank you. And thank you, Jackie, for running the show today too.
Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah.
Bye.
Nice. Oh, people are dropping, but we still have about 26 people on, so we will go to the next question. How can you tell if a company culture aligns with you if you are entering the field brand new?
Yeah, I can speak to this one quickly as well. You know, I think if you think about the current company culture that you're in and things that maybe you don't like as much, I would use that as kind of a guide for questions to ask. So a hyper-specific example is I like the ability to be off camera for some of my calls. I typically go on camera, but for some calls, it's nice to be able to multitask, go on a walk on things that I'm not actively participating in. So one of the questions, you know, that I ask if I were to be interviewing for a role would be, you know, what's the culture like? If you're joining an internal call, is it mostly cameras on, cameras off? You can kind of get an understanding of, hey, do these people like to chat within, you know, their teams? Are they pretty camera off? That kind of thing is a really hyper-specific example. But if you think about what you like or what you wish you had in your role, you can use that to kind of judge the company culture. I wouldn't ever ask just outright, what's the company culture like? Because you're going to get a lot of canned responses, but you can think of some pretty specific things to kind of get your finger on the temp.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. I don't have a ton more to add. The only two things I will say is make sure that you are aligned with what your values are. And it could be anything, right? And then the other thing too is to consider asking, what's your rose and thorn? That's what I like to ask during my interviews. Like a rose is what you love and what gets you excited every day to come to work. And then what's your thorn? Like what's kind of, it's a little iffy. and see what they say, because sometimes people will be very transparent in their responses. And I think that's another way to just get a little bit more of a curated insight into what the company culture is like.
I might, even on the monitor, I'm gonna add a little plug right here, having just gone through this. I think a big thing to remember is don't phrase the questions in a very negative way. So a big thing for me, I came from a company who I was sometimes up at 7 a.m. for East Coast meetings. I was sometimes working at like 6 a.m., 6 p.m. for West Coast meetings. And, trying to figure out how I balance school pickups was really important to me. But talking to my new company, I was talking to parents and they were like, yeah, we just block our calendars out for school pickups. And I think it's just, having some of those realistic conversations helped me understand this is a good move for me. Because you do have to think about, everything that is really important and top priority for you. But I didn't want to start out with a negative, but understanding what was important to other colleagues helped me understand that they valued some of that same, time management and balance.
I'm glad you chimed in, Jackie, because I was actually very curious what your perspective was.
Yeah, thanks. Let's see. Another question we got was, can you elaborate on job switching? When do you know it's time to jump ship?
Yeah, I'm assuming this was targeted toward me since I'm the self-proclaimed job hopper, but job switching is interesting. I think, the key thing that has always indicated it's time for me to swap is a lack of growth. So I don't think you should put too much weight into little small daily occurrences that make a job feel frustrating or hard, because work can be frustrating and hard. But what I really do use as my threshold is how am I growing, and is there an opportunity available to facilitate my growth further? That's usually been a marker that really helps me in terms of picking a new role that's going to be an improvement, whether that's salary, opportunity, etc. So that's one of my key indicators. I also would say another thing that can kind of show when it's time to jump ship is also that the opportunity for a bigger, better, whatever that means to you, role. It doesn't have to be title. It doesn't have to be pay. It could be, am I working on something that I'm really excited about, like accessibility? Am I working on a client that I've always dreamt of? That can usually indicate it's time for me to continue to move. I will also say that while I am advocating a little bit for job switching, there's also something to be said about staying put and continuing to grow and push in your current role. And I think if you're feeling a little stagnant, yeah, you can consider switching to a new company, but you could also consider switching roles, asking for more responsibility, asking for different types of projects, et cetera, as a way to kind of feel like you're being challenged.
Yeah, I can just echo everything Bryce shared and add that one of the key indicators for me was that I just wanted to increase my earning potential. And I think it's okay to have that as a main indicator for wanting to switch roles. And so I also looked at what sorts of things I liked in my current role that I could be doing like full time in my next role. And so I mentioned earlier that I really love the strategy work and I love to kind of, do some of the bigger picture thinking about UX and how it is incorporated into the day to day. And so my current role allows me to do just that, right? I'm like doing that strategy. I also have a little bit of UX embedded, but I'm not necessarily spending, IC time doing research or doing design specifically. So those are the two things for me. And then just like loudly echoing, if I'm not being challenged, I think it's time to jump ship, especially because we're students all the time. I like to think that way. And so when I feel like my time here is done and I'm not consuming anymore, growing in any type of way, I know that it's time to look for new opportunities.
Thank you. And I think this was, okay, do you have other recommended companies, places to upskill or places to find mentors? I think there was some of this being shared in the chat, but, love to hear from Bryce and Melody.
I feel like I do. They're all bookmarked somewhere. The one that comes to mind is like one that I think most people know, which is ADP List, as a good place to find mentors. Bryce, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, a lot of those areas have been shared in the chat, and I think definitely dive in deeper there. In terms of mentors, you can sign up for a really regimented or like a actually facilitated mentorship program, like and I can't of course think of any off the top of my head, but ADP List and a bunch of those, they definitely do exist. Join one of those. But if you want something a little less official, I would honestly recommend taking a look at previous managers, previous people you worked with who you enjoyed and would like to learn more from. Also, just kind of reaching out on LinkedIn to any person that you look up to and respect. I think you'll probably send some messages and not hear back, or it might not be a perfect fit, but you really only need one or two. So it's definitely worth shooting your shot, or whatever the saying is, so that you can find someone who can really guide your career. And then I know this was said earlier, but one thing that I would really recommend is, and what sets up a good mentorship experience is coming prepared with things that you want to know, want to learn. It's definitely valuable for the person who you're asking for time from if you come prepared with things that you're curious of. And it also does show that like you're ready for a mentor. If you don't have things to ask, you might not need a mentor. It's not necessarily a box to check. It's a value that you'll know when you're ready for.
I'll add one quick thing to look at from my perspective is having just joined a new company. I actually there's an employee who just reached out to our design team. They're not in the design org. They work in customer service, and they've been studying UX. And they said, "Hey, I'd love to know how UX works at this company." I'm like, "Great." So connected with their manager, and I said, "Is it okay if we do some sort of informal mentorship? Like, I want to make sure it doesn't take away from their time, in their job. But if our company is, really wanting to help employees grow within, I'd love to, invite them to our critiques, spend, have a one-on-one with them, once in a while." So highly encourage you to like utilize your network that you already have, like work within your company, work with your manager, and see if there's like that sort of potential there.
I dropped one more resource in the chat, which is digital.gov, and I use them very frequently because I work for state government. But I also think they're helpful and have helpful tips for people who are working in private and other industries. So it'd be a nice place to start.
Great. And then back, another salary question. This was the last one in here, was how many times have you countered the initial offer? When do you know the company won't pull the offer? So I think it was around like that concern around, how much can I really negotiate? It sounds like.
Bryce, do you want to? Okay, I didn't know. I'll just quickly share. I'll quickly share. I've countered twice, or like for two different roles. And I think when it comes to if they're going to rescind the offer, whenever you're doing the final stage interview, they want you. So I'm automatically going into that negotiation conversation with kind of like the leg up. Like I can leverage this opportunity. And so I think there's always the risk that they're going to rescind, but even if they rescind, then I have to ask myself, is that a company that I want to work for just because I asked to be paid my worth and my values? So I don't know. I think it's a tricky question, but I always recommend negotiating when you can. And they can say no,
Definitely. I think that's excellent advice, Melody. And, I think of things, think of this two ways, but the first is it's really rare that a company is going to rescind an offer. Like Melody was saying, you have the leg up, they want you. And from my experience, I have, if a company is not even close to that point, but they'll tell you. So I've had an experience where I've asked for a certain amount and they've said, here's what we can do. And I said, are you sure? And they, kind of shared like the team was obsessed with you. You're definitely the number one choice, but we do have quite a bit of a backlog. And so, this unfortunately is the amount. And if it doesn't work for you, we are probably going to consider some other people in our backlog. So, it sounds scary, but it's really, they're still wanting to hire you. They're just giving you their baseline for what they're able to do. So yeah, I wouldn't be afraid of rescinded offers. And if an offer is rescinded, that's pretty bad business in my opinion. So like Melody was saying, consider if that's something you want to be a piece of. I also be a part of. I also would say in terms of like how many times to go back and forth, I'd be really clear on what you want and where your threshold is and share that and say, here's my threshold and see if they can get to it. It shouldn't be this back and forth of like 6 times. That's starting to get a little, I think if it's a ton of back and forth, you and the company aren't really clear on what you want. Yeah.
I really like the phrase of, here's my number. If you can meet this today, I will sign right now. And usually
Yes.
that gives some folks some encouragement.
Yeah. And I've used that. And it's like, here's my number. And you have to actually know it. And you have to actually be willing to kind of make a move if you use that line, but it's a great line.
I think there's so much conversation today, just being really conscientious of time. So Matt, it sounds like we might have to set up more of these, or if there's a way to, send out the deck or, collect questions. I would encourage everyone to, look us up on LinkedIn. I don't know if our names were published on the meetup, but connect with us on LinkedIn, connect with other people here on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. I love giving rise to women voices from design. It's amazing. Because of course I was raised by a bunch of, angry agency bros. And so it's always amazing. And I have 3 girls at home, so it's important. It's important. And so yeah, thank you all so much sincerely for being here. And thank you for the extra time for those of you who are able to hang out and answer more questions. I'm actually going to save the meeting chat so that we can see if there's any other questions that didn't get answered. And then if it's all right with you all, I will be posting the recording, and then we'll provide a link to that if there's any follow-up questions and hit you guys up. Okay. Anything else? Any last parting amazing words? Good. We said it all then.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.